I walked into the fertility clinic with a knot in my stomach so tight I could barely breathe. The kind of ache that starts behind your ribs and radiates outward until your fingertips go numb, until even the air feels too heavy to pull into your lungs. The automatic doors whooshed shut behind me with a finality that made me flinch, sealing out the cold November wind that smelled faintly of dead leaves and exhaust, and trapping me inside with the sharp sting of antiseptic mixed with somebody's too sweet vanilla perfume that clung to the back of my throat like regret. The receptionist slid the intake forms across the counter without looking up, her voice flat and tired, the voice of someone who had delivered the same script 1,000 times to 1,000 women who all looked a little like they were drowning. Fill everything out. Be honest about prior pregnancies, miscarriages, any genetic conditions. When you're done, we'll take you back for the initial blood work. My hands trembled so badly the clipboard rattled as I took it. The pen felt heavier than it should have, cold metal biting into my palm, like it already knew what I was about to admit on paper and judged me for it. I found a quiet corner in the waiting room, the kind of place where hope and heartbreak sit side by side on cracked plastic chairs that have heard too many whispered prayers and too many silent screams. The overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly, harsh and unforgiving, casting everything in a sickly yellow light that made the young mothers-to-be look ethereal and made me look like a ghost who had wandered into the wrong decade of her life. Evelyn Harper, age 51, address: my daughter Lauren's spare bedroom, 1427 Maplewood Lane, Evanston, Illinois. 6 months ago, I would have written the house on Sheridan Road, the one with the wraparound porch where Richard and I used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings, watching the lake turn gold while we made lazy plans for vacations we never took. 6 months ago, I still had a husband who looked at me like I was the reason the sun came up. A savings account with 6 figures that felt like security, and a future I thought was unbreakable, woven tight with 25 years of shared history. Now I was here to sell my eggs. Not donate, sell. The clinic paid $8,000 per viable cycle to women under 35 with perfect hormones and perfect lives. They paid women over 50 exactly nothing, unless you counted the polite rejection letter that always started with, "Thank you for your interest," and ended with the quiet suggestion that maybe it was time to let go. But they still needed carrier screening, genetic testing, a full panel for the registry, and for that they paid $350 cash the same day if your veins cooperated and you didn't faint or cry or ask too many questions. I needed $312 for Lauren's epilepsy medication refill. The generic had jumped again. $23 more than last month, $23 I didn't have, and our old insurance was long gone. Canceled the same week Richard changed the locks and told me I was on my own. I filled in the boxes with a shaking hand, the pen digging too hard into the paper until it tore in one spot. Number of previous pregnancies: 2. Live births: 1. Miscarriages: 1 at 19 weeks, 2011. Genetic conditions in family: none known. I hesitated at the line that asked about recent major life changes, my breath catching in my throat like a fishhook. How do you summarize betrayal in a checkbox? Divorce pending, business bankrupt, husband living with his 34-year-old assistant in the condo we bought for retirement. I left it blank and felt the shame crawl up my neck like heat rash, hot and prickling, making my scalp tingle under the careful low bun I'd twisted my hair into that morning because I still had some pride left, damn it. Around me, young women scrolled TikTok, legs bouncing with nervous energy before their retrievals, their laughter bright and sharp like breaking glass. A couple in the corner held hands and whispered about baby names. Eleanor, maybe, or James. Their faces glowing with that particular light only people who still believe in happy endings have. The light I used to wear like a second skin. I felt ancient, invisible, like a ghost who had wandered into the wrong decade of her life. My reflection in the darkened window showing a woman with new lines around her eyes and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile without effort. The blouse I wore was the last decent thing from my old wardrobe, silk, the color of champagne, saved for occasions and meetings that never came. It hung looser now. I'd lost 12 pounds since Richard left, the kind of weight that falls off when your appetite disappears along with your dignity, when dinner becomes a choice between eating or paying the electric bill. Just $350, I told myself, gripping the pen so hard my knuckles went white and the plastic creaked. Just enough to keep Lauren from another seizure, to keep her from waking up on the kitchen floor with foam at her lips and fear in her eyes because Mommy couldn't afford the medicine that kept the monsters in her brain quiet. Just enough to buy me one more month before I had to figure out how to sell the dining room table that seated 12, or the good china we never used, or whatever piece of my old life would fit on Facebook Marketplace without breaking my heart completely. They called my name sooner than I expected, the sound of it echoing off the beige walls like a verdict I wasn't ready to hear. The phlebotomist, Marisol, led me to a small room that smelled sharply of alcohol and lemon disinfectant, the scent burning the back of my throat and making my eyes water. The walls were the color of weak tea, closing in as she gestured to the chair with its cracked vinyl armrests. "First time doing the full panel?" she asked, tying the tourniquet around my arm with practiced efficiency, her fingers cool against my skin. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. My voice come out smaller than I meant, cracked around the edges like old paint, betraying every ounce of the fear I'd been swallowing for months. She smiled kindly, the kind of smile that had seen too many women like me, women who came in hoping for one thing and left carrying something entirely different. "Roll up your sleeve." The needle slid in clean, a quick sting, and then nothing but the strange pull as my blood rushed out, dark and thick in the vials. I watched it fill vial after vial, 6 in total, more than I'd ever given at the Red Cross drives when life was normal and giving blood felt like a civic duty instead of survival. Marisol labeled them carefully, her latex gloves snapping softly with each movement, then paused at the last one. Her brow furrowed just for a second, but long enough for my stomach to drop lower than it already was, for the room to tilt slightly on its axis. "Everything okay?" I asked, hearing the tremor I couldn't hide, the way my voice climbed half an octave like it did when I was lying to Lauren about money being tight, but we'd be fine. "Just... your blood looks perfect. Veins of a 30-year-old. She forced a laugh that didn't quite land, but something in her tone made the room feel suddenly colder, the air conditioning humming louder against my skin. She disappeared with the samples and left me alone under the harsh light, the clock on the wall ticking too loud, each second stretching like taffy while I counted heartbeats and tried not to think about what perfect might mean when everything else in my life was falling apart. I don't know how long I sat there, 10 minutes, 20, counting the ceiling tiles until the numbers blurred, trying not to think about Lauren's last seizure, the way her eyes had rolled back and her body had jerked like something inside her was trying to escape its own skin. I'd held her while the ambulance came, whispering lies about how everything would be okay, how Mommy would fix it, how daddies sometimes leave but mommies never do. I hadn't fixed anything. Not yet. But I would. I had to. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't Marisol, it was Dr. Phillips, the clinic director himself, looking like he'd jogged from upstairs, his white coat flapping open over a rumpled shirt, tie askew. Behind him stood a woman in an expensive camel coat that had no business being in a fertility clinic on a Tuesday morning, the kind of coat that cost more than my car and probably came with its own security detail. "Mrs. Harper?" Dr. Phillips said, pitched too high, almost breathless, his face flushed like he'd run up 3 flights of stairs carrying the weight of the world. "Could we speak privately?" My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I felt it in my teeth, in my fingertips, in the sudden roar in my ears that drowned out everything else. "Did they find cancer markers?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them, raw and terrified, every worst-case scenario flashing behind my eyes in vivid, merciless color. Lauren alone, me gone, the last parent she had left, taken by something silent and invisible. No, nothing like that. He closed the door with a soft click that somehow sounded final, like the closing of a chapter I hadn't finished reading. The woman in the camel coat stepped forward, extending a manicured hand that smelled faintly of rose and money and places I used to go before everything fell apart. "Evelyn Harper? I'm Victoria Langford. I represent the Caldwell family." She said the name like I should know it, like it was supposed to mean something more than a headline or a pharmaceutical logo on a bottle. I did. Caldwell Pharmaceuticals. The kind of money that buys buildings and names them after themselves. The kind that ends up on the news when they cure something or ruin someone or both at once. I shook her hand on autopilot, my palm damp against her cool, dry one, my wedding ring still there because I couldn't bear to take it off, catching slightly on her skin. I don't understand. Dr. Phillips couldn't contain himself any longer. His face was flushed, eyes bright behind his glasses like he'd just witnessed a miracle and couldn't decide whether to shout it from the rooftops or whisper it in case it vanished. Mrs. Harper, the genetic sequencing we ran for the carrier panel flagged something extraordinarily rare. You're a homozygous carrier of the Delta 32 mutation on the CCR5 gene, both copies. Do you know what that means? I shook my head, the room starting to spin at the edges, the walls pressing in until I could feel them against my shoulders, even though I hadn't moved. Your bone marrow stem cells are naturally HIV-resistant, he said, the words rushing out like he'd been holding them in for years and they'd finally broken free. There are fewer than a dozen verified people worldwide with this exact double mutation who are healthy enough to donate. We're required by international registry to flag it immediately. Victoria Langford never took her eyes off me, her gaze steady, almost gentle, like she was looking at something fragile and priceless and trying not to scare it away. Mrs. Harper, Charlotte Caldwell, Benjamin Caldwell's 6-year-old daughter, is dying. Leukemia. Her only hope is a bone marrow transplant from someone with your exact genetic profile. They've been searching for 18 months. You're the match. The room tilted violently, the floor rushing up to meet me even though I hadn't moved, the air suddenly too thick to breathe. You want my bone marrow? My voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking underwater, like the woman I used to be had already started dissolving. You will compensate you $2 million, Victoria said calmly, as if ordering coffee, as if the number wasn't life-altering, world-shattering, the kind of money that could buy back everything I'd lost and more. A private flight leaves for Boston tonight. The procedure is non-surgical now. They filter the cells from your blood over 5 days at Dana-Farber. You'll stay in a suite at the Four Seasons. Full medical care, travel for your family, everything covered. $2 million. 6 hours earlier, I was counting quarters in my purse for Lauren's prescription, praying the pharmacist would let me pay the rest next week, praying Lauren wouldn't have another seizure because Mommy was too broke to keep her safe. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible only to discover you carried something priceless inside, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like mine, and I'd love for you to stay for the next one. I stared at Victoria Langford's perfectly composed face, searching for the catch, the trick, the moment someone yelled, "Gotcha!" and the floor dropped out from under me again. My hands had gone numb, the clipboard forgotten on the chair beside me, the pen rolling to the floor with a tiny clatter that sounded too loud in the sudden silence. I don't understand. Why me? Why now? My voice cracked on the last word, raw and ragged, betraying every sleepless night, every tear I'd swallowed so Lauren wouldn't see. Because Charlotte has weeks, she said softly, and for the first time her composure slipped just enough for me to see the raw fear underneath, the kind of fear only a parent knows when their child is slipping away and there's nothing money or power or prayers can do. Dr. Phillips handed me a tablet already open to a bank transfer confirmation, $200,000 as a good faith deposit pending signature. The numbers blurred as tears filled my eyes, hot and sudden, spilling over before I could blink them away. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it, the screen swimming like heat waves over asphalt in July, the kind of heat that makes everything shimmer and distort until you can't tell what's real anymore. I need to call my daughter, I whispered, the words barely audible over the roaring in my ears, over the sudden dizzying realization that everything was about to change and I wasn't sure I was ready for the weight of it. They gave me a private office that smelled faintly of lavender cleaner and old coffee, the kind they use when they're trying to pretend this isn't a place where dreams come to die or be born or be bought and sold in fluorescent lit rooms. The chair was too big, swallowing me, as I dialed with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. Lauren answered on the first ring, her voice thick with sleep and worry and that edge she got when she knew something was wrong but was trying not to scare me. Mom, did you get the money? Something happened. My voice cracked like thin ice under too much weight, as I explained, every impossible detail spilling out in a rush that left me breathless. When she finished, there was only silence. The kind that stretches so long you start to wonder if the call dropped, if the world had stopped turning just to punish you one more time. Mom, she finally said, her voice small and far away, the way it used to sound when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. This sounds like a movie. Or a scam. I thought the same. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching cars crawl along the street below like toys someone else was playing with, watching my old life shrink in the reflection until it was barely recognizable. But the doctor confirmed everything. Caldwell Pharmaceuticals is real. I looked them up while they waited. Lauren, they transferred $200,000 just to show they're serious. It's already in my account, I checked. Another long pause, and I could almost hear her thinking, weighing every angle the way I taught her, the way survival teaches you when the world keeps kicking. What happens if you say no? Then I get $350 today, and we figure out next month's meds the way we always do. You keep working double shifts at the coffee shop instead of finishing your nursing degree. I keep wondering which bill to pay and which one to let slide until the late notices turn red and the lights go out. Lauren's voice hardened, the same steel I'd heard the night she told her father not to come back until he could look her in the eye and explain why he chose someone else over us. Then go. But promise me everything in writing, and you call me every day, twice, morning and night. And Mom, if it feels wrong, you get out. Promise me that too. I promise. I whispered, tears sliding hot down my cheeks and dripping onto the blouse that used to be champagne, and now just looked tired.
I insisted on changes to the contract the way I once negotiated vendor deposits for million-dollar weddings. Daily health limits written in bold, iron supplementation protocol with specific dosages, mandatory rest periods between sessions, the right to stop if my hemoglobin dropped below a number I chose myself, and a clause that Lauren could fly in at any sign of complication. No questions, no delays, first-class ticket waiting at the gate. Victoria Langford raised one perfectly arched eyebrow, but agreed to every point without hesitation, her pen scratching across the pages like she'd expected nothing less, like she'd seen mothers fight for their children before and respected the ferocity of it. "You negotiate like someone who's built something before," she observed, capping her Mont Blanc with a soft, expensive click that echoed in the quiet room. "I did," I said, signing my name with a hand that finally stopped shaking, the ink dark and permanent against the white. 23 years of running Harper and Grace events. Until my husband decided the collapse of one gala meant the collapse of our marriage and walked away with half my life in his suitcase. She didn't flinch, didn't offer pity that would have felt like salt in the wound. "Then you understand contracts better than most, and consequences." 4 hours later, I was boarding a private jet with nothing but my purse and an overnight bag Lauren had packed while I signed my life away on dotted lines, her hands steady, even as her eyes were red from crying. The leather seats smelled like money and lemon polish and new beginnings I wasn't sure I deserved, the kind of scent that says you finally arrived somewhere you never thought you'd be, and you're not sure if it's salvation or just another fall. As we lifted off over Chicago, the city lights blurring into rivers of gold beneath us, I looked down at the grid of streets that had chewed me up and spit me out, each one a memory I wasn't ready to say goodbye to. Somewhere down there was the house I'd lost, the office with my name still on the frosted glass door I couldn't bear to take down, the husband who'd told me, "You've destroyed everything we worked for, Evelyn. I can't watch you drag us all down," like love was something you could walk away from when it got hard. His voice still echoed sometimes when I tried to sleep, a ghost that refused to stay buried, whispering that maybe he was right, maybe I was the common denominator in every disaster. Victoria sat across from me reviewing documents, the cabin lights casting soft shadows across her face that made her look almost human. "Charlotte's father will want to meet you tomorrow," she said, without looking up, her voice clipped but not unkind. "He's intense, but he loves his daughter more than life, more than anything." I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. My fingers tracing the condensation on the water glass the flight attendant had pressed into my hand like a lifeline. The engines hummed beneath us, steady and sure, carrying me away from everything familiar and towards something I couldn't name yet. My phone buzzed. Lauren checking I was really on a plane, sending a selfie with red-rimmed eyes and a thumbs up she didn't feel, the background of her tiny apartment looking smaller than ever. Then another text, from a number I hadn't seen in months, the one I deleted but apparently not blocked, the one that still made my stomach twist like a knife. Richard, heard you're in Boston for medical reasons. Everything okay? I stared at the screen until the words blurred, until the cabin lights reflected back at me like accusations. News traveled fast when billions were involved, when your desperation suddenly became someone else's salvation, when the woman you threw away was suddenly worth something again. I typed back with fingers that felt detached from my body, each letter deliberate. Fine. Handling business. He replied instantly, the 3 dots appearing and disappearing, like he was choosing his words carefully, like he still thought he had the right. We should talk when you're back. I've been thinking about us. I laughed out loud, bitter and sharp, the sound startling in the quiet cabin, echoing off the polished wood like gunfire. Victoria glanced up, one eyebrow raised in silent question, her expression unreadable. Everything all right? Just my ex-husband remembering I exist now that money might be involved, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, how the bitterness tasted almost sweet on my tongue. She gave a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile women give each other when we recognize the same scar. Some men have a sixth sense for that, like sharks smelling blood in the water. The Caldwell estate outside Boston looked like it had been carved from a fairy tale, gray stone walls dripping with ivy that caught the last light of dusk, windows glowing warm against a gathering dark, a circular drive long enough to land a helicopter without waking the neighbors. The air smelled of wood smoke and impending snow, crisp enough to sting my lungs and clear my head for the first time in months. A nurse met me at the door, her shoes silent on the marble that stretched endless and cold, and led me across grounds that felt like another world to a guest cottage that was bigger than Lauren's entire house back home, all warm wood and soft lamplight, and fresh flowers spilling from crystal vases, white roses and eucalyptus, the exact arrangement that used to be my signature for winter weddings. A basket of luxury snacks sat on the counter beside a handwritten note in bold, impatient handwriting that looked like it had been scrawled in a hurry between phone calls and nightmares. Thank you for giving my daughter a chance. Whatever you need, ask. B. Caldwell. I barely slept, the silk sheets too soft against skin that had grown used to thrift store cotton, the quiet too complete after months of listening for Lauren's seizures through thin walls. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face the night Richard left, the way she'd stood in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself like she could hold our family together if she just squeezed hard enough, and the way she looked at me afterwards like she was waiting for me to fix it, and I didn't know how. At 6 a.m. they drew more blood, the prick familiar now, but somehow more intimate, ran scans that hummed and clicked like impatient insects circling prey, started me on injections that burned cold under my skin and made my arm throb in time with my heartbeat. The doctor, a kind Indian woman named Dr. Patel, with gentle hands and tired eyes that had seen too much, explained everything twice, her voice steady over the beeping monitors that sounded like accusations. You'll feel flu-like aches, maybe some bone pain as production ramps up. We monitor constantly. You can stop anytime, Evelyn. Truly, no judgment. I won't stop, I said, the words scraping my throat raw, tasting like iron and determination. She squeezed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, her eyes meeting mine with something that looked like respect. You're stronger than you know, stronger than most. That afternoon, they brought me to meet Charlotte, wheeling me through corridors that smelled of lemon polish and fear and the particular sterile sweetness of children's hospitals trying to be kind. The private room was dimmed, curtains drawn against the gray November light, machines whispering like lullabies around the tiny figure in the bed. She was so small, bald from chemo, skin almost translucent under the soft glow of the bedside lamp, but her eyes, huge and blue and ancient, locked on me the moment I walked in, like she'd been waiting her short life for this exact moment.
Benjamin Caldwell stood beside her like a sentinel, tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of man who looked like he could carry the world if it asked nicely and break it if it hurt his child. Exhaustion was carved into every line of his face, shadows under his eyes so deep they looked bruised, his shirt rumpled like he'd slept in it for days. "Daddy, is that the angel lady?" Charlotte whispered, her voice paper-thin but bright with wonder, her small hand reaching out from under the blanket like a question. Benjamin's voice cracked on the edges when he answered, raw and careful, like he was handling something that might shatter. "Yes, baby, this is Evelyn. She's going to help make you strong again." I knelt by the bed, my knees protesting the movement, the floor cold through my jeans, and pulled a small stuffed giraffe from my bag. The only thing I'd grabbed from Lauren's old toys, worn soft from years of love and nightmares. Charlotte clutched it immediately, pressing it to her cheek like it was the most precious thing she'd ever been given, her fingers so thin I could see the blue veins beneath. "You're pretty," she said, studying me with solemn gravity that no 6-year-old should have to carry. "Daddy said you have magic blood." I swallowed hard, tasting salt, and something that might have been hope. "Something like that, sweetheart." Benjamin extended his hand. When I took it, his grip was fierce, grateful, terrified, like he was afraid if he let go, the moment would vanish and take his daughter with it. "There aren't words," he said quietly, his voice rough as gravel over broken glass. "Just thank you." Over the next days, a routine settled in, fragile as frost on a window pane, beautiful and temporary and heartbreaking all at once. Mornings at the hospital for filtration, 5 hours strapped to a machine, while my blood left my body warm and returned colder than winter, the hum of the pumps a constant reminder that I was giving pieces of myself I could never get back, that this was what love looked like when it had teeth. Afternoons resting in the cottage, wrapped in blankets that smelled of lavender and money and someone else's life, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was what redemption felt like. Painful and necessary and terrifying all at once, like being reborn through fire. Evenings reading to Charlotte when she had strength, her small hand curled around mine as I stumbled through stories about brave little girls who always found their way home, her breathing soft and even against my arm, while Benjamin watched from the doorway like he was afraid to hope. Benjamin appeared often, at first just to check on Charlotte, his presence filling doorways like a storm cloud heavy with rain, then to bring me tea in a paper cup because he noticed I never finished the fancy stuff in the cottage, then to sit and talk when she slept, his voice low so we wouldn't wake her, the space between us shrinking with every shared silence. "You planned weddings?" he asked, one night, reading the bio the foundation had apparently compiled, the one that made my old life sound glamorous instead of the slow-motion train wreck it had become, his finger tracing the edge of the paper like he was trying to understand how someone could build something so beautiful and lose it so completely. "For 23 years, I said, tracing the rim of my untouched tea with a finger that still trembled sometimes when I thought too hard about everything I'd lost. Built it from my dining room cable with nothing but a secondhand laptop and a dream and a husband who said he believed in me." "What happened?" The question was gentle, but it landed like a punch to the sternum, knocking the air from my lungs. I told him everything. The vendor who cut corners on refrigeration to save $300 that cost me everything. The norovirus outbreak at the mayor's daughter's reception that sent 200 guests to the ER and made the papers for weeks. The lawsuits that snowballed like an avalanche I couldn't outrun. The insurance that denied coverage because of a loophole no one saw coming until it was too late. Richard walking out 3 weeks later with a suitcase and the words, "I can't be married to failure," like 25 years could be packed away as neatly as his monogrammed shirts, like love had an expiration date and mine had come due. Benjamin listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with every detail until I thought it might crack. His hands clenched so hard on his knees the knuckles went white. When I finished, the silence stretched so long I could hear the monitors beeping in the next room, steady and relentless. "He's a coward," he said finally, the words flat and final, like a judge's gavel coming down. The bluntness startled me, made something inside me flinch and then settle. "He's hurting too." "No," Benjamin cut in, voice like steel wrapped in velvet, soft but unbreakable. "He abandoned you when you needed him most. That's not pain. That's cowardice. And cowardice has no place in a marriage or in a man." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, just stared at my hands knotted in my lap, and felt something inside me shift, like a bone finally setting after months of being broken, painful but necessary, the first step towards healing. On the fourth day, Richard texted again, "Claire says you're still in Boston. People are talking about the Caldwell transplant. Call me." I showed it to Benjamin without thinking, the screen glowing accusingly between us like evidence in a trial I never agreed to. He read it, jaw tightening until a muscle jumped in his cheek, his eyes darkening with something that looked a lot like rage held carefully in check. "He thinks he's entitled to half because you were married when the offer came?" His voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before thunder. "Technically, the divorce isn't final." The words tasted like ash, like every compromise I'd ever made to keep peace in a war I didn't start. Benjamin's eyes flashed, something fierce and protective flaring behind the exhaustion, like a match struck in the dark. "Let me have my lawyers look at the separation agreement." I can't ask you to. The protest died in my throat when I saw his face. The absolute refusal to let anyone hurt me again, written there in lines I was only beginning to read. "You're saving my daughter's life," he said, cutting me off again. Gentler this time, but no less certain. "The least I can do is protect yours. Let me." That night, the bone pain hit hard, a deep aching that started in my hips and radiated outward like roots cracking stone, like my body was trying to remake itself from the inside out. I woke at 3 a.m., aching so deeply I could barely move, tears streaming hot down my temples into my hair, soaking the pillow until it was cold against my cheek. The on-call nurse found me curled on the bathroom floor, rocking like a child. And within minutes, Benjamin appeared in the doorway wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that clung to his shoulders, hair toused from sleep, clearly dragged from his bed by someone who knew he'd want to be woken, who knew what this kind of pain did to a person.
He didn't ask permission. He didn't speak. He just lowered himself to the cold tile beside me, slid an arm around my shoulders with the careful strength of someone who had held his dying child through worse nights, and pulled me against his chest without hesitation. I resisted for half a second. Pride, fear, the weight of 25 years of doing everything alone, of being the strong one because there was no one else, then collapsed into him, sobbing like the world was ending. And maybe it was. Maybe this was what breaking open felt like before you could be put back together. "I'm scared," I admitted through tears that wouldn't stop, that came from somewhere deeper than bone, from the place where all the grief I'd swallowed lived. What if it's not enough? What if I let her down? What if I let you both down? What if I'm not enough? He held me tighter, one hand stroking my hair with the kind of helpless tenderness only parents know when their child is hurting and there's nothing they can do but be there. "You're giving her a chance no one else on earth can," he whispered against my temple, his voice rough with unshed tears of his own. "That's enough. You're enough. More than enough." I don't know how long we sat there on the bathroom floor, the night pressing in around us with its cold and its quiet, his heartbeat steady under my ear while mine raced like a trapped bird trying to escape its cage. At some point, the pain ebbed enough for exhaustion to win, and I fell asleep against his shoulder. His arms the first safe place I'd known in months, maybe years, the first place I didn't have to hold everything together because someone else was holding me. The next morning, I found a new text from Richard waiting like a poison dart buried in my phone. We need to discuss community property. My attorney says the transplant compensation is marital asset. I forwarded it to Benjamin's lawyer without comment, my hands steady for the first time in days, the message short and final. Do whatever it takes. The filtration sessions continued, each one leaving me more wrung out than the last, my body a battlefield where hope and pain fought for dominance. But my body held up better than anyone expected. Dr. Patel called me her superstar donor with a grin that lit up the whole room and made me believe, just for a moment, that maybe I was. Charlotte's numbers started climbing, slow but steady, like dawn creeping over the horizon after the longest night, like proof that sometimes the impossible just takes a little longer. On day 5, she sat up in bed, without help, and asked for macaroni and cheese, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks, her eyes bright with something that looked like tomorrow. Benjamin found me in the family lounge afterward, crying again, but happy tears this time, the kind that come from somewhere so deep you didn't know you had it in you, the kind that wash everything clean. She ate the whole bowl, he said, breaking on the last word, his eyes red-rimmed and shining with tears he wasn't trying to hide anymore. She asked for seconds, Evelyn. She asked for seconds. I laughed through the tears, the sound catching in my throat like a sob turned inside out. That's everything. He hugged me then, sudden and fierce, lifting me off my feet like I weighed nothing, like joy had made us both weightless. I felt his body shake with silent sobs against mine, great shuddering waves of relief and gratitude and terror finally set free after months of holding it all in. When he pulled back, his hands stayed on my shoulders, grounding me, anchoring me to this moment that felt too fragile to be real, too perfect to last. That night he brought dinner to the cottage, takeout Italian from someplace in the North End, nothing fancy, just pasta and red sauce that stained the corners of our mouths, and crusty bread that steamed when we broke it open. We ate cross-legged on the floor, because the chairs felt too formal, and I was too sore to sit properly anyway, our knees touching accidentally, then not accidentally, the space between us shrinking with every shared laugh. Richard's lawyer contacted mine, he said quietly, twirling spaghetti around his fork with more concentration than it required, his voice carefully neutral like he was handling something explosive. They're threatening to sue for half the compensation. I closed my eyes, the old familiar rage bubbling up hot and bitter, tasting like copper on my tongue. Let them try. Benjamin set down his fork with deliberate care, the clink loud in the sudden quiet. Marry me. I choked on my wine, coughing so hard he had to thump my back, his hand warm and steady between my shoulder blades. What? Not for real. Not yet, he said quickly, his cheeks flushing dark under the stubble he hadn't bothered to shave, his eyes earnest and terrified and hopeful all at once. A marriage of convenience. Massachusetts recognizes common law after 3 years, but a legal marriage now would make the compensation separate property acquired during a new marriage. He can't touch it. It's clean, final, and safe. I stared at him across the cardboard containers, the absurdity of it crashing over me like a wave, threatening to pull me under or wash me clean. I couldn't tell which. You'd marry a stranger to protect money that's already yours? It's not about the money. And the raw honesty in his voice stopped my breath, made something in my chest crack open like ice on a thawing river. This is insane. Probably, he agreed, a tentative smile tugging at his mouth, the first real one I'd seen from him that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face into something younger, lighter, possible. But I'm tired of watching good people get punished for being kind. And you, Evelyn Harper, are the kindest person I've ever met. The strongest, the most everything. I thought of Charlotte's smile that morning, gap-toothed and radiant and alive, of Lauren finally registering for fall classes without having to drop because of money, her future opening up like a flower after rain, of the woman I used to be,
who trusted too easily and paid too dearly for it, who woke up every morning for months wondering if she was worth saving, if anyone would ever choose her when it mattered. Yes, I said, the words surprising us both with how steady it sounded, how right it felt leaving my mouth. But only if Charlotte is our flower girl when she's strong enough to walk down an aisle, scattering petals like she's scattering hope. His smile broke wide open then, transforming his whole face, and for the first time I saw the man he must have been before grief carved him hollow, before fear became his constant companion. "Deal," he whispered, and then softer, "Thank you."
We flew to City Hall 2 days later with Lauren and Dr. Patel as witnesses, the November wind whipping our coats as we hurried inside, laughing like children at the absurdity of it all. Charlotte watched via FaceTime from her hospital bed, wearing a paper veil the nurses had made from gauze and tape, clapping her small hands every time the judge said something official, her laughter bright enough to cut through the gray day. I wore the same champagne blouse from the fertility clinic, now wrinkled beyond recognition and stained with hospital antiseptic and red sauce from takeout nights, but it felt right somehow, like closing a circle that had been broken for too long. When the judge pronounced us married, Benjamin kissed me softly, reverently, his hands trembling against my cheeks like he was holding something sacred, like a promise instead of a transaction, like the beginning of something neither of us had dared to hope for, but both of us needed more than air. Richard's lawyer withdrew the claim the next week, with a curt email that smelled of defeat even through the screen, the subject line blank, like they couldn't find words for losing. Charlotte's transplant engrafted perfectly, her tiny body accepting my cells like they'd always belonged there, like we'd been connected long before this moment of desperation and grace. By Christmas, she was running down hospital corridors, chasing bubbles the therapists blew, her laughter echoing bright enough to chase away every shadow that had ever darkened those halls. Lauren started nursing school in January with a full ride she earned on her own merit, plus a little anonymous donor who covered books and housing and the kind of peace of mind money can't buy, but sometimes helps create. And I, somehow, impossibly, found myself living in the cottage on the Caldwell estate that slowly stopped feeling temporary, planning not weddings, but second chances, futures built from the ashes of everything I thought I'd lost, waking up some mornings to find Benjamin already watching me, with something soft in his eyes that made my heart stutter and start again. Benjamin never pressured, never pushed, never asked for more than I was ready to give. We slept in separate rooms for months, tiptoeing around the new shape of us like it might break if we looked too directly, like love was something fragile we were both afraid to name. But some nights, when the pain from donation lingered deep in my bones like an echo, or Charlotte had a bad day and the fear came roaring back like a tide, he'd crawl into bed beside me without a word, just to hold me until the shaking stopped, and morning found us tangled together like we'd always belonged that way, like the universe had been trying to put us together all along and just needed a miracle to make it happen. One morning in March, he found me on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky the color of peach and gold and every promise I'd ever broken to myself, still wearing the pendant Dr. Patel had made from a preserved drop of my donation blood, tiny and perfect, suspended forever in resin like a heartbeat caught mid-beat. "You kept it," he said softly, settling beside me with 2 mugs of coffee that steamed in the cold March air, his shoulder brushing mine like a question. It reminds me who I am when I forget," I admitted, turning the pendant so it caught the light, glowing like a captured heartbeat, like proof that even the smallest things can hold entire worlds. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the colors shift across the sky, across my face, across the space between us that wasn't space anymore. "And who are you?" Evelyn Harper Caldwell. I thought about it. Really thought, letting the question settle into all the cracked places inside me that were finally starting to heal. The woman who once planned perfect days for strangers until one imperfect night stole everything. The woman who lost her home, her business, her marriage, her certainty that she was lovable when things got hard. The woman who sold her future for $358 and accidentally saved a life. Who discovered that worth isn't something you build or buy or marry into or lose when someone walks away.
I'm the woman who discovered her worth was never in the house on Sheridan Road, or the client list, or the ring that's now in a drawer somewhere, I said finally, touching the pendant, then touching my chest where my heart beat steady and strong and mine again. It was here, all along, through every loss, every betrayal, every morning I woke up wondering if I could keep going. It was always here. Benjamin took my hand, lacing our fingers like it was the most natural thing in the world, like we'd been doing it for years instead of months. "Stay," he said simply, his voice rough with everything we hadn't said yet, but both felt in our bones. Not because of contracts or money or even Charlotte, though she adores you and calls you Mama Eve when she thinks we can't hear. Stay because I'm in love with the strongest person I've ever met. Stay because somewhere between hospital floors and paperwork and pretending this was just convenience, I fell completely, irrevocably in love with you. Stay because I can't imagine mornings without you on this porch, watching the sun come up like it's the first time. I looked at the pendant, glowing crimson in the morning light, then at the man who had seen me at my absolute lowest, crying on bathroom floors, bargaining for God for one more day, wearing the same stained blouse like armor, and never once looked away, who chose me when he didn't have to, who saw me when I couldn't see myself. "I already did," I whispered, leaning into him as the sun crested the horizon and painted everything new, everything possible, everything ours. 6 months later, Eventuality Foundations opened its doors in a sunny storefront downtown, my new company helping families navigate medical crises the way I once helped brides navigate seating charts and bridezillas and rain plans that never quite worked. Benjamin funded the seed round without being asked, just left the check on my desk one morning with a post-it that said, "For all the second chances you deserve," his handwriting messy and perfect. Lauren runs community outreach, her nursing school scrubs swapped for business casual, and a smile that finally reaches her eyes and stays there. Charlotte cuts the ribbon in photos, gap-toothed and healthy, holding a pair of oversized scissors like a sword and grinning like she's conquering the world one bright day at a time. Richard got nothing but divorce papers and a final judgment that closed the book on 25 years with clinical efficiency, the kind of ending that should have hurt more, but somehow felt like freedom. And every year on the anniversary of the day I walked into that fertility clinic, desperate for $358, Benjamin and I take Charlotte back to the same waiting room with its cracked plastic chairs and flickering fluorescents and the faint smell of hope and heartbreak. We leave an anonymous donation in an envelope thick enough for 10 mothers to buy medication without selling pieces of themselves, without wondering if they're worth saving, without having to choose between food and medicine and dignity. Because I know now what I carried inside me wasn't just rare stem cells. It was the power to begin again, and the certainty that sometimes the greatest miracles start with a woman who thought she had nothing left to give, discovering she still held the whole world in her veins, and that sometimes the world gives back when you least expect it. If you've ever felt broken only to discover you were exactly what someone needed to heal, tell me in the comments. You're not alone. And if this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. I have so many more to share. Stay with me for the next one.